Welcome everyone to a new episode of Real and Raw. Your story is your medicine. And I'm so happy because today I have my dear sister Jacqueline here live with me. And I'm so excited to have you here. Jacqueline is a very, very dear sister of mine. And she's such a wise woman, truly connected to her body, to her womb. And yeah, it's an honor to have you here and hear your story, hear your wisdom. And yeah.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm so glad we're doing it in person in your beautiful yurt. I have spent so many magical moments in this place, and it feels really fitting that we are here to record this podcast.
Totally. So beautiful. Yeah. And it's so nice. Like, we've been wanting to record this podcast like in forever, like for over a year. Like, actually, when the first time you reached out to me on Instagram, and yeah, we were speaking about the podcast, and we're like, oh yeah, we should definitely do an episode together. And well, here we are
A year later.
Exactly. But it's perfect. The timing is perfect. It's like it all like riped perfectly, and yeah, it's divine timing. And so we're gonna go into quite a deep, beautiful, profound topic. We're gonna talk about the mother wound. And but before we actually go deeper into that topic, into all the juiciness, and but also anyways, the word didn't come, so yeah, it's okay. So yeah, I really want to tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you? And a little bit about your life, your maybe also your rites of passages, anything that you wish to share.
Okay. So I am a maiden, which is something I identify with from being in the Blood Mystery School, which is a beautiful container that I participated in last year, led by Nancy and Kristen. And so if we think of a woman, we can think of four main phases in her life. The first one is maidenhood, then comes the motherhood and mother. And then we've got, a phase that you can name lots of different things because she's often the forgotten archetype. So the third one is like the witch archetype, the alchemist, I'm forgetting the other words. There's so many, maga, there's so many words for her. And then final one is the crone. So that's like really the old wise woman. So I'm a maiden because I'm not yet a mother in this life. And so it's important to acknowledge that I'm talking about this topic of the mother wound from two different perspectives. The first perspective is as a daughter, but the second perspective is as a woman. And these two perspectives are really different because in my understanding as a woman, the imprint of motherhood and the meaning of what it means to be a mother is already innate. It feels like these codes that are encrypted in all of my cells, like writing on walls, that just haven't been read yet because I haven't gone through that rite of passage of motherhood. So I can't know what it feels like to be a mother, but I know that I inherently am also, as a woman, I can speak to this topic differently. So those are the two perspectives I want to bring in. And a bit more about myself. I live here in Switzerland, which is why we're doing this in person. And I had a childhood where I moved around a lot. So I was born in the US. I grew up here. I then spent 4 years in England. So since almost about a year, I quit my corporate job and have really been focusing on doing a lot of healing and giving myself the time and space to, uncover, I think, all of the treasures that I hid away for a really long time. And so I went through a really, really big initiation about a year ago, which was just a huge catalyst for a lot of transformation in my life. And the Blood Mystery School was kind of the container that held me during all of those big, big transformations. And indirectly, that's also why we know each other, because the Blood Mystery School is one of the containers that the Free Birth Society offers, and you obviously as a radical birth keeper, we're also in a container by Free Birth Society. So that also links us beautifully.
Ooh, wow. I'm already super moved and touched. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And well, I mean, if you just listened already just to the introduction, this is exactly what I talk about. Like, and that's why I really wanted to invite you, because like, and I know you're so young, and like there's already so much wisdom. And what I really like love is that because you're really doing that work, right? It's like not just something that you just heard or something. No, it's like you have gone through that, and you're like constantly, like obviously like we all do, like we're going through those processes, but like really doing the work, right? And like so there's so much wisdom there. And so yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And oh my God, I was actually thinking, oh, that would be such a good other podcast just to talk about all these archetypes.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. We could definitely get into that, but I just wanted to briefly touch on that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I am very young, so for any listeners, I'm 24. But really this journey and this awareness of the mother wound, I think has always been with me, and it's always been there. But really more intensely confronting it has already been a process of over a decade. So I was very, very young when I realized there were things happening in my family system that weren't benefiting me. And the first big step that I took, which I think for a lot of people is unimaginable, but for me at the time was the only way forward. When I was 13, I decided to go to England, and I went to boarding school for 4 years. And that was the first big decision I made, to step outside of my family system and start to discover who it was that I was. And then a year later, actually the second big decision came, whereby I decided to completely cut off all contact with my mother. So I was 14, and I decided that it was just too much, and I didn't know at the time how long it would take me to heal what I needed to heal, and to discover what I needed to discover before I was able to really step back into contact with my mother. In the end, it was, I think, almost 5 years. Or maybe 4.5 years, where we really didn't see or speak to each other at all. And I think, hearing that, it sounds like a really extreme decision to have made, and it definitely was. And I honestly, looking back, can't really comprehend where I got the strength and conviction from, but it was just there, and it was really clear. And we've been able to, so my mother and I have been able to look back on that experience and talk about it, and understand that it was really intense for the both of us. But ultimately it was what we both needed. And I think one of the elements that I'd like to bring into this discussion, because I don't really see many people talking about the mother wound. I think another really common topic that we talk about or hear about nowadays is the sister wound.
Right.
And the sister wound is really closely related to the mother wound, in my understanding, because the way that you relate to your mother and the way that you watch your mother relate to other women is that first impression and imprint that you get on how to relate to other women.
Yeah.
And in that, inherently, I think, yeah, the mother wound and the sister wound are very, very related. And the things that we've come to understand that damage the sister wound also damage the mother wound, right? And it's all about the fact that most women are extremely cut off from their innate power, are completely dissociated and disconnected from their bodies, and are just basically malnourished on all levels, right? And this is a topic that that really feeds into my experience, because I too had a mother who was severely under-resourced. And and I think looking back, I now have so much grace and so many different perspectives. But definitely the one thing that I wish for myself and for my mother, looking back, is just that there would have been more resources, that there would have been more connection, more support, more understanding that motherhood is an incredibly resource intense thing to do. I think it's the most resource intense thing that you'll ever do. And and today, luckily, we have the understanding that, it takes a village, and that sisters are supposed to support each other, and mothers are supposed to support each other, and that rest is a huge part of what is needed during motherhood and postpartum and all of that. But I think 20 odd years ago, unfortunately, the idea was just that you could be a mom, you could be a working woman, you could do everything at the same time. And looking back, I really wish my mom would have had more support.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, that is the thing also. I mean, and I want to ask you then, if you can then afterwards briefly, maybe share from your own, in your own words, what is actually the mother wound, right? And before we get into that, I just want to say, that's the thing also, right? Because before, we cannot blame them either, right? Because it's they didn't have the resources either, right? And it's oh wow, just understand okay, the damage is, or what has been done, right? And going from there. But yeah, so if you could just explain in your own words, maybe what is actually the mother wound, maybe for listeners who were completely new to this topic, how would you bring it into in a nutshell? What would that be?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever even read a definition of what the mother wound is. I think I've just spoken to it naturally. If I had to define it today, if we imagine the connection between mother and baby, for a really long time in our lives, that's the primary bond that sustains our life. That has, first of all, given us life, and then continues to sustain our life so that we can thrive, grow up, survive, become adults, and move around in this world. And the mother wound, in my opinion, encompasses anything that damaged that innate, deep intimacy that is present between the mother and the child. And when there is a rupture in that bond and in that relationship, it cuts deep, because it cuts to the core of our existence. So the mother wound for me is like the wound of all wounds. It's like the primary wound. And it is, it is just, it'll affect everything else in your life going forward. And it really, in terms of what could happen, it could be anything that, as I said, sort of cuts that intimacy. So really looking at the world that we live in, pretty much everyone has this mother wound, this primary wound, because it can start basically during childbirth in experiences such as, cesareans, or even just having a really, really difficult birth, being separated from your mother really quickly after birth. So those can sort of be the more obvious things. But then after that, and once you're sort of, an infant and then a young child, it's anything that destabilizes you as a child. And if we think of the child's physical state, depending on the age, but for a long time, you're completely dependent on your mother to survive. Initially, you might be breastfeeding, but even if you're not being breastfed, you need that primary caregiver to survive, right? And at the same time, the other thing that's happening is that your nervous system and your mother's nervous system are co-regulating. So that basically means that whatever emotional state that your mother is in, that her nervous system, like whatever state her nervous system is in, is the state that your nervous system as the child is in. And what definitely was the case for me is that my mother was in a state of an existential crisis. She was just barely holding on and surviving. And that meant that my nervous system sort of learned that this state of like, I could die any minute, and I'm like in a trauma response, and if that's a freeze response or a fight response or whatever it is, but it's a state of like, I'm barely keeping it together, is what I was immersed in, and what I think a lot of people were immersed in. And then obviously there's so many different other factors that can happen. And so I think when we look at the mother wound, a great place to start is actually really your birth story and understanding what was your birth story like. And for me, a huge part of my birth story was the fact that I had a really severe kidney issue. So one of my kidneys was not functioning at all. And this was diagnosed when I was in my mother's belly using ultrasound. And so a huge part of my birth was that it was highly monitored, and that both my mother and I were highly monitored. And as soon as I was born, I was whisked away and loads of tests were done on me and all of that kind of thing. And there was a lot of fear around this health issue that I had. And then at the same time, my brother was really young still as well, and he had a lot of health issues. So I think the feeling I get if I feel back into that young version of myself, the overwhelming feeling that I get is like, there's just not enough for me. There's not enough space for me. There aren't enough resources for me. And obviously none of this was intended that way, but that's just the way that it ended up being, and the feeling overwhelmingly that I got. And so I think looking at your birth story is a really important place to start, to understand where it all came from.
Right. And I think it's so beautiful that you just bring it up, because I think how many of us are actually aware or know about our own birth story, right? It's so true. Like we don't know, we don't talk about these things. So wow, thank you for bringing this up. And it's true, it's super important.
Yeah. So if you don't know about your birth story, go ask your mom if you can, if she's around, if you are in touch with her. Obviously, my heart goes out to you if that isn't the case and you can't find out about that. I still believe you can go back and reclaim and heal a lot of things, even if your mother isn't alive anymore or isn't around in that way.
Yeah, totally, because you can access it in your body.
You can access it in your body. And I think that's the next really big key to this whole topic for me, is really accessing things in my body. So I then grew up, and through a lot of other different experiences that I won't go into now, but basically ended up being a very, very dissociated child, which in my understanding and in my lived experience just means that I was completely cut off from my body. And I remember the first few times I came into contact with yoga and more sort of spiritual practices, and people kept saying, like, feel into your body and notice if there's like a place where you can feel a tingling or a bit of heat, or, all of these like body scans and body awareness exercises. And for years, I didn't feel anything,
Mm.
absolutely nothing. And I remember a really intense moment where I broke down and cried because I just felt like my entire body felt dead. I could feel so much death and just this toxicity, and this, it just felt like my whole body had been poisoned and killed, and I had no way of accessing that. And so a huge part of my journey to get to the point where I am today, and to have been able to have healed what I've healed with my mother, is this process of truly incarnating, remembering myself, as in physically remembering myself, bringing my body together, bringing my soul into my body, and gaining access to my body. And a huge part of that is safety, right? So we can only come back into our body when we feel safe to do so. And so if you're sitting there thinking, gosh, I just can't access anything, or I can't feel anything, I think it's so important to be graceful with yourself and realize that that your body's trying to protect you from really painful experiences, and the fact that you're not able to access them is because your body doesn't feel safe enough to yet. So that is a huge part. And I think cutting off all contact with my mother initially was really difficult, of course, but in the long term it helped me create enough independence and then enough safety independently to be able to then come back into contact with her. But obviously that was a really long journey, and has changed a lot over the past few years as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible also, like, to actually just think. I mean, I just think back, like, when I was 13, like, how on earth were you able to do that? Like, how did you even, like, well, you said before there was just like a deep knowing, but like, still, I feel like it's so, I don't even want to say courageous, because that's the thing. Like, if it's something, if you know something, it's just, you just got to do it. But still, right? It's like, how did you like find the strength, or like to make that decision? Because we are also in a way, like, because we are dependent, especially on our mother. And like, even if we know, like, maybe something is off, like something needs to be like really off, so you get to decide, like, oh, I'm actually better off, like cutting all contact.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different factors, and actually I had quite an intense moment when I was listening to Diana's podcast that she did with you, and she beautifully described that, and I'd never heard anyone describe it that way, and I think it's definitely true for myself, that that she was a really unhappy child, but it was masked perfectly. And one of the aspects that masked it was her intelligence, her academic performance. And that was definitely the case too for me. I think I was a deeply unhappy child. I felt extremely lost, and yet, and I've always been that way, I'm a very high functioning human being. And that's something that someone recently described me as, an old friend of mine. And I was like, okay, that does hit the nail on the head. I'm high functioning in the sense that no one really saw how badly I was doing, because in all of the traditional senses, I was doing well. I did well in school. I was involved in music. I had, things going on. And so no one really thought to second guess it, or to question it. when I was 11, my parents separated, and then later, got divorced. And that process was also very difficult for me. And ultimately, yes, I then realized, okay, I just need to get out of this system. I just need to be anywhere else. And luckily, yeah, the format of boarding school enabled that for me. And then enabled me then, gaining that independence of really then being really far away from your parents, really far away from your family, completely alone. I was able to then experience things that reinforced that strength for me, right? And I remember vividly, and I've heard people recently talk about this as like an official technique and practice you can use, but back in when this happened to me, I just naturally did this. But it's a beautiful moment. I remember the first time I was on the National Express bus, which is just a bus line in the UK that took me from Heathrow Airport to where my school was. And I remember sitting on that bus thinking, wait, what have I done? Wait, can I just like, hold up. Can we go back? Like, is this just a dream? Can I just go home? And then I had this voice, and I had all this, this panic and these emotions coming up, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, what if I don't make any friends? Like the next possibility of me going home is like weeks away. Just this panic and this fear came over me, which hadn't come up at all until then. And then suddenly this other part of me took over and was like, calm down. And I just imagined myself in 6 months. And I started talking to myself internally and saying to myself, but imagine, like, in 6 months, you'll be sitting in this exact same bus, and you'll be so excited to see all your friends, and you'll be so excited to be able to go back and sing, and you'll be so excited to be able to do this, and you'll be excited for this particular food, or this particular class, or this topic, or this teacher, or whatever. And I just, I really put myself in that position, and I imagined the joy and the excitement that I would feel being able to come back to this place and wanting and longing to come back to this place. And it completely calmed me. And of course I was still really nervous, but it gave me a lot of strength. And then as time progressed, obviously I then realized, oh, wow, I can do this. And I made a bunch of friends, and I integrated really quickly. And I am a bit of a chameleon. And because I had moved around a lot previously, I was accustomed to being thrown into completely new social situations. So I was used to that element of it, having to completely rebuild a new friendship group because I had moved so many times already. And then it just reinforced that. And then being away was really helpful to be able to understand, okay, how do I feel when I'm away from my family, and how do I feel when I'm with my family? And then in the first year that I was in England, it got to a point where it was like the strings just snapped, and I realized, okay, this isn't working anymore. Like, I cannot put myself back in that situation anymore. And I could just feel how I had put myself in this box to fit into my family unit, and I just didn't fit in that box anymore. I tried to squeeze myself in it, and I was like, okay, this is not working anymore. And that's when I realized, okay, I really need to take a step back and figure things out for myself. And
Wow. And where did you go from there?
So I moved in with my dad, and then I lived with my dad.
That was when you were already back.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I kept going back and forth from England, right? So obviously, like, it's boarding school, but you still have holidays. So you go back to your family on the holidays, and and that's when I really had those feelings of like, okay, this isn't working anymore. And then I moved in with my dad. And so I would spend holidays with him, and then I'd be in England the rest of the time. And and I think overwhelmingly, and I mean, looking back and seeing who I am now, I still think, gosh, I was so lost on so many levels still during that time. But it's unfair to compare myself to who I am now. And I think for the person I was back then, I have so much love and respect for the younger versions of myself. And I just think, yeah, it all really worked out the way it was supposed to. And yes, it was a really difficult decision to make. And I felt extremely guilty for not talking to my mother, for you know, for the impact it had on my brother as well. And I struggled with that a lot, these overwhelming feelings of guilt that I've just done the worst thing that anyone could ever do to another human being. And that I've just, yeah, subjected my family to so much pain. But ultimately, I know now it was what we all needed, and it was definitely what I needed. And it's become a recurring thread, and it's evolved over time. But I think there's a part of my soul and my being that has always been good at this, and then the rest of myself that has sort of been deeply conditioned and, you know, exposed to all sorts of other stuff, often forgot about that. But luckily I always had that part that kept stepping in when it needed to, of what it really means to take care of yourself and to prioritize yourself. And I've learned what this means in a completely new way now in the past year. But I truly believe that the greatest service that we can provide is to take extremely good care of ourselves. And it's really hard to do. Right. But it changes everything. It really, really changes everything.
Totally does. Wow. And how was it then when you started to get back in contact with your mother? Like, how did that feel? Was it your decision? And how did that go?
It was an interesting process, actually. And it almost sounds silly to say, but we actually bumped into each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we had a moment where we literally bumped into each other in Zurich. And I think a part of me was like ready to step back into contact with her. It was really difficult for me in that moment, and I'm sure it must have been really difficult for her as well. I can't imagine what she must have been feeling.
Right, because how long haven't you seen each other?
More than 40 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I think after that we slowly got back in touch, and it was a difficult process at first, and it was weird because it was like we had to get to know each other again, because I had changed so much during that time, and also she had changed so much that we really had to completely get to know each other in a new way. And at the same time, there were still a lot of things that I hadn't healed enough. And so I think for a while there, we just both realized that we wanted to be a part of each other's lives in the best way we knew how. And for a long time, it was messy and it wasn't great. And it might have been, you know, superficial, or we might have felt really awkward around each other, or not have known what to say to each other or how to handle the situation. But I think on some level, there was this mutual understanding that we wanted to make a relationship work somehow. But initially the resources weren't quite there yet to really make it what it is today. But we both continued to work on ourselves and work through things that came up, and eventually I think we found a place in each other's lives again. And then last year, I think when I went through all of the deep transformation that I did, I then realized, oh, I can now meet my mother in a very, very new way. And I think that's something I'd love to talk about a little bit more, because what I've seen a lot and what I've heard a lot is that, you know, people on a spiritual journey or whatever you want to call it will at some point rupture with their family or rupture with their roots. They might move away for a while. They might go and do something. You moved away. And yeah, part of that is really natural. Like there is a completely healthy and natural detachment that needs to occur from your family in order for you to become your own fully developed adult being, right? So there's an element to that that's completely healthy. And a lot of people who come from, you know, dysfunctional families might have to rupture more severely than others, right? So just going to university and moving out might not be big enough. It might be like, you know, moving away or whatever it might be. But what I don't see a lot of people speak about is that coming back together, and just how challenging that is, and how complex it is to change in lots of different ways and then be thrown back into your family system.
Yeah.
It's wild. It's really, really wild. And I just want to put in, like, because it's like I always say this quote because it's like, and I want to like, just keep going with that topic because I think it's so important. But I like to put this quote in from Ram Dass, like, whenever you think you're enlightened, go back and live with your family. Like that quote has been accompanying me for the last 2.5 years, like very, very, very dearly. So yeah. And it's very true, and it really is. It is then enlightening. That's the actual enlightening moment when you go back to your family and you realize, oh, I'm not enlightened.
Oh shit.
Oh shit. Yeah, but it's so potent. So there's so many things that I could speak to in that. And it's so layered. But I think to put it into context and to ground it, I want to come back to this understanding of the nervous system and this co-regulation, because I think this is really fundamental to these dynamics. So in my lived experience and in my understanding, the family dynamic is like this nervous system state, and it's like this it's like the system that is built, and in the system there are rules and people have roles, and it's usually quite stagnant. It's usually like, ooh, I'm stuck in this one role. And no matter what your family dynamic is, if you're the youngest child, the oldest child, the middle child, the wild child, the black sheep, the whatever you are, you're probably in some sort of role. And often, to me, going back into spending time with my family, it almost feels like I'm playing a play, like I'm playing a piece of like a theater piece that I've watched a million times. I know it off by heart, and but I have this out of body experience where I'm just watching myself behave, and I'm thinking, that's not the enlightened girl who went to Bali or wherever. Her instead, like, why isn't she here right now? And I think the reason for that is that, and again, I mean, this is not scientific, but it's my lived experience, is that when we come into proximity with our families, it's like this puzzle piece and our nervous system just clicks back in. And it's like, you're locked in this position. Your body is in the state that it was in when you were 6 or 12 or however old you were. And this crazy, intensely anchored and replayed system just takes over.
Mm.
And I had a really groundbreaking moment with my mother when I was talking to her and we had a bit of a difficult conversation and she got too close to me. Like she just physically got too close to me. And I had this overwhelming feeling of like something was pushing me back.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to take 3 big steps backwards. And I could feel my body click out.
Ooh.
Like I felt viscerally, oh, I've unclicked. I'm out of this
I'm
system.
having goosebumps right now. It's
Yeah.
so
And so whatever that looks like for you,
Mm.
for me, it was really realizing that I had cultivated enough safety and stability in my body and my nervous system that I could feel those differences, and also that I was able to hold myself when I clicked out. So I clicked out and I was like, okay, now I'm in my space. And then the first important thing was to tell my mother to not move closer to me because otherwise she would like click me back in immediately.
Wow.
And so I asked her, can you please stay where you are? And I realized that all of a sudden I had access to parts of me that I hadn't had access to earlier. And I had words and I had feelings and I had just resources I didn't have before because I was not in that like entrapped, enmeshed system. And so the focus for me then became, okay, how can I keep cultivating stability in my nervous system and be able to be in my mother's presence or my family's presence, but not have to, with my physical body, enter that system.
Mm.
And that's really where things started to change for me, and where I realized, oh, okay, these elements of myself that I've healed and I've developed can actually now come into this system and be lived into the system. And that's when things get really interesting and lots of shifts and changes can happen. But before you get to that point, you might just feel really frustrated because you just keep replaying these things. And it's like a trap. It's awful. And that's not to say that I don't experience moments when you know, I'm in a challenging situation and I don't fall into those old patterns, because I do all the time. And we all know that family has a way of like bringing out the absolute worst of us. And it's a heartbreaking realization to have over and over again, that you can't show up for the people that you love most in the way that you would want to. But I think we need to have a tremendous amount of grace with ourselves in that aspect. And my key motto for all of the things when I'm navigating this is just grace, like love and grace. I keep coming back to love and grace, that I love my family, I love myself, I have grace for my family, and I have grace for myself. Otherwise you just go insane.
So true.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. I love how you just explained that, because it's so true. Like you literally put like the image to what it really, how it really feels like. And I love that, because like when you can be aware of that, like actually unplug yourself from that. Oh my God. And I think what's really difficult is then once you're unplugged, to really staying in your lane and like with the boundaries, like, because of course, you know, let's say now in that case, the mother, for example, like she's going to go back into her patterns and she's not going to like that, because you are not playing that part anymore. It's like, but wait, like something is missing, right? And so like to really stay with yourself, like, no, I'm not gonna play that anymore, or at least in this moment, like I'm trying to stay out of it.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable for a long time. And at the same time, it's a huge invitation for all other family members
Totally.
to step into whatever it is they want to step into. And it's really, really potent. And I mean, it can go so many different directions, but I think ultimately, it really comes to figuring out, okay, where are my boundaries? Where are my boundaries, and what are the things I need to feel safe?
Right.
Right? So that might be that you say to yourself, okay, I'd feel safer talking to my mother on the phone. Great. Then have a phone conversation with her. Or I'd feel safer talking to my mother if we weren't in my home, but we were at her place, or we were in a neutral place, or, you know, whatever it may be. Like, I think really all of the tools in the world can then help us. Like, I love working with flower essences. They're beautiful, energetic medicine that you can use. I mean, you can really, there's so many different things. You can work with sound therapy. You can just focus on your breathing when you're in your family's presence. You can do so many different things, but ultimately, I think you need to do whatever feels possible. Right. So that might not be going to Christmas, because it might be a 3-day event. And you might think, well, it would be amazing and my family would love to have me there, and it would be really terrible if I don't go. But is it worse if you don't go, or is it worse if you go and you just relive a pattern that you yourself hate, and you're sure that your family hates, even if they can't express it or can't verbalize it, or aren't aware of it, because it's in the field, it affects everyone. Like, really weighing up, is it really worth it? And then understanding, okay, if it's not, what's something else I could do? Like, if I can't go for the 3-day Christmas, what if I go for an afternoon when we're opening presents? Or if I bring, I don't know, some food that they love, or whatever it is, and try and figure out what it is that you can give, what you can participate in, and at the same time honor yourself and honor your family.
Right. Yeah.
And know, and this is a huge piece, and actually I did an Instagram post about this recently. I hardly ever post on there, but this is one of the things that I'm really firmly convinced of. And the statement I made is, anything that you do to your own detriment cannot serve anyone else. And that's the principle, right? So if you're doing something and you know, this is going to hurt me, it's not going to serve. It's not going to help. Of course, it's the easier way. And of course, going a different route would cause pain. And the route I chose caused so much pain. Leaving my family caused so much pain.
Right.
But it was the only way that I could get to the point where I am now.
Right. Yeah.
And having a really deep understanding of that, I think, is crucial, because as women, we are very much socialized into this martyr role, this role of, you just have to sacrifice. And if you sacrifice enough and if you give enough to other people, you'll save the world and everything will be great. But ultimately, you're the one who suffers.
Right.
And part of the mother-daughter relationship that I think is particularly difficult is that as women, we are very empathetic, and I often got overwhelmed by the amount of empathy I had for my mother. And being acutely aware of her pain was really hard to handle, right? Because you think, well, if she's hurting, I want to do whatever I can to make it better.
Yeah.
And removing yourself from that system and taking radical responsibility for yourself. And with that, giving radical responsibility to your mother that she can take care of herself is also a big step that allows you to really meet at eye level.
Totally. Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked about this exactly like a few weeks ago or so. And it's exactly that, because I know that is one of my own issues I have as well with my own mother. It's that thing of like not wanting to see her suffer. And like, exactly, then coming into that savior and wanting to save her. And that's just not how it works. And it's so painful. It's so painful, like you say, and like, because we are so connected, and like, it's so difficult to figure out, like, okay, what is mine now, and like, where am I just like over giving, and in the end, like, just hurting myself. And yeah, that is like a crucial point. And I actually wanted to kind of like go back a little bit to what you mentioned before, because I think it's also a really important point, when you were saying about, that a lot of times, when you move away, you go away and all of that. And I mean, I'm just there also speaking from my own experience, right? Because I did that too. And it was needed at that time, right? I needed also that, like, I just need to go on my own journey, figure things out. The thing is just because, like, we don't, like, we forget sometimes that being physically apart doesn't heal anything. I mean, as unless or until we actually go to the energetics, like to the actual root, like, we're actually just keep on perpetuating the same patterns with other people, and we're thinking that this is normal, but it's actually still that old wound that we're carrying with from our mother. And like, really going there to like cut also these energetics, like bringing, like, reclaiming my own parts, giving back the parts that belong to my mother, and like really having that clearance energetically, because that's where it ultimately, where the healing can happen, when we reclaim also our own parts and like reparent ourselves.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So I haven't actually spoken to this, but it's so good that you mention it. And the key word here is reparenting.
Exactly.
Okay, so and this is a huge premise, I don't know why I mentioned it, a huge premise of showing up. And this isn't only regarding, the relationship with your family or your mother, but just showing up as a true or a truer and always becoming truer version of yourself involves giving yourself everything that you lacked. Because as you said, otherwise you're just replaying the pattern of what it was that you needed in hopes of getting what it is that you needed back then, that you might get it today. And ultimately it's not going to lead you anywhere, because what you need to do is you need to give yourself all of that.
Yeah.
Again and again and again and again, as many times as you need. And personally, I struggled with that for a really long time. So, I mean, I've been to different kinds of therapy, and some forms worked and some didn't. Luckily, I did end up working with a really, really beautiful woman who I think really helped me understand like the basics of what it means, or just to understand the basics of healthy order and natural order. And I think that's also a really crucial part in what you said earlier, is like understanding what part belongs to you, what part doesn't belong to you, understanding what is the right order, like what is the natural order of this relationship, and what just isn't healthy. So for example, if your parent is seeking emotional support from you, or excessive validation from you, understanding that's not in the natural order for you as a child to be providing that, right? So first of all, I think we need to learn the basics of what the natural order is, because in our world is so dysfunctional that that's just not there anymore. And then when we understand that, and this is judgment free, this doesn't mean that, your mother withheld something from you or maliciously did something to you. None of this is with judgment. It's just the truth and understanding the facts. And once you understand all of that, really being able to see, okay, what can I give myself? And I think one piece that isn't spoken to a lot when it comes to this is the willingness. Okay, so you might be thinking to yourself, oh, cool, I can just give myself all the love I didn't get as a child. But you might still be really struggling with feeling worthy of that.
Mm.
You might be struggling with patterns of self-harm, and you might not be able to receive that yet. Or want to give it to yourself. And I definitely went through a phase where I couldn't meet my younger selves and my inner child with love. I was myself still in so much pain, and the pain was still so acute that I couldn't really see anything other than that. And I think the one thing I really want to say, because often in the spiritual community and in the enlightenment and self-development and blah, blah, blah community, we can get like to a really, really unhealthy space of gaslighting and forcing things that aren't true. So we've got to be really honest with ourselves about where we're at. And if you're not at a point where you can say, okay, I can love all of those parts of myself, then that's okay. Then that's where your work starts.
Right.
And that's the thing you need to work on. Because if I would have told myself 5 years ago, oh, you need to forgive your mother and you need to like love your mother so much and love yourself so much and whatever, like I could have told myself those things, but I wasn't there yet. I just wasn't there yet. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And we might have to feel a whole bunch of really uncomfortable feelings and go through grief and anger and shame and just so many different emotional layers before we're really ready to move forward. So I think I've digressed, but I think in that there's a lot of things. And once you get to the point where you realize, okay, now I can A, I'm resourced enough, I can give myself these things, B, I'm willing to receive these things, then you can suddenly go back to your family system and you can meet them from a place of abundance. And you can meet them from a place where truly the love that you inherently have is allowed to shine through. It's not that you then love them more because you've always loved them, but that love is able to shine through because it's no longer clouded by your lack. It's no longer clouded by your hurt, by your pain, and it's no longer being sidetracked by what you're still trying to get out of your family.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is a whole other thing we could get into, but there's so many layers. And ultimately, what I just want everyone to take away from this is that this is, in my experience, the hardest work out there.
Yeah.
Because it sits so deep and it touches everything, and it often takes you to an existential place. I often got to a place where I felt like I'm gonna die. Like I had panic attacks and these feelings of like, I'm literally, I don't know if I can continue to exist if I go through this.
Yes.
And anyone who is willing to confront this topic, willing to work on this topic, willing to shine love on this and heal this, can be so proud of themselves and deserves so much love and grace, because this is big work.
Totally. And this is good that you just touched on this, because I wanted to also like share this, because I remember we talked exactly about that in that conversation a few weeks ago. And I really wanted to say that because what really landed when you said that is it's like, and it's something, but like there, it really landed. And it's that thing of like, you truly think you're going to die. Because, and what you said so beautifully, because, like when you were a baby, you would have died. And it's like, of course, that's still the feeling. It's like, if she's not there, or like if I don't get that from her, I'm literally gonna die. And it's oh, it's so profound because that really touches me deeply, and that woof, did so much to me when you shared that, because and yeah, that's why I really wanted to say that, because it's so important to realize that, and to see also that, yeah, it might feel like, but can you go there, because you're not gonna die.
No, you're not gonna die. You're definitely not gonna die, but it really does feel like it. And I just got goosebumps when you said that again. Yeah, I mean, it's the primal wound, it's the deepest work, and it is all of these things, and I promise you, you're not going to die. And I also want to say here that that when we're going to these places where emotions get really big and really overwhelming, I think it's important to be really resourced.
Yeah.
So don't force, I mean, first of all, don't force yourself into any emotions, because that
Totally.
that doesn't work. But if you're gonna go there, you know, get help. Yeah. Get professional help. Get friends to help you. You know, if you're going through a big process, let people in your life know that this is going on. I mean, I know that's really hard to do, but get other people involved, because, and this is a key part, when you're working with the nervous system, sometimes you physically need other humans. Yeah. And I've also experienced this in my body, where I have gone through things that I felt like, I physically cannot do this alone. I physically need like 5 or 6 other people to hold this with me. And it means that they're bearing witness, that they're aware of what's going on, that they themselves are resourced and they can support you if you need support. And just that there might be another body physically next to you. And that body could help you regulate. Or maybe it's an animal. I mean, this is where, you know, working with animals is huge work. And my beautiful animal Murphy, who's just lying right behind this camera setup, has been a tremendous support in this. And the other thing I want to speak to when it comes to being resourced is remembering that the Divine Mother is always there, and that there are so many resources out there that are here to support you. And when you get overwhelmed, remember that you're sitting on the earth and Mother Earth is holding you. And when you need to go into big emotions, that the ocean is here to guide you. And when you need to go through the fire and die and be reborn, you have access to that. You have access to all of these resources. And part of the work that I'm bringing into this world, and the work that I've done with myself, I've called goddess ceremonies, and those are sacred times where I remember that I am deeply held and supported in all that I do. And if something is too much, I can give it to someone else. I can give it to a goddess. I can give it to the Divine Mother. I can ask the earth to help me hold this pain, because we don't have to do it ourselves. And actually, we can't do it ourselves. And it would be ridiculous to want to do it ourselves. So when we get to those places where we get really overwhelmed, remember that there are infinite resources always available to you. Yeah, and that's a game changer.
Oof. Wow. Yeah. Oh wow. Thank you for all of that. That's the fire.
Fire.
Speaking about fire.
The fire has given its nod of approval.
Exactly. Wow. And we're actually already like speaking for an hour already, I think. Yeah. I just wanted to ask one if there's anything else that you think that you would like to touch on, that you think that you would want to share. Please go ahead. And then otherwise also, like, just any last words of wisdom that you like to, any more wisdom. It's already so much wisdom.
That's a good question. I think I've spoken to a lot of different things that I wanted to speak to. Like, by all means, I could talk about this for hours, and there's so much to unpack. And I think I've said really most of the things that I wanted to say. And ultimately, yeah, I think actually one thing I want to share just to round it out, is that I recently had a really profound experience where I sat in ceremony with myself and two younger versions of myself showed up. And suddenly I could just see these two girls, and I immediately knew what age they were. And I was able to look at them, inside myself, or like look at them, like I could see them and look at them, and I was filled with so much love for them. But more overwhelmingly, I could feel how much they loved and admired myself as the woman I am today. And that really shook me. And it gave me the opportunity to reflect on how far I've come and how truly I have always, and even if it wasn't inherently clear in my actions, had this orientation to want to protect myself and to do what is best for myself. As I mentioned earlier, I had this really strong part in myself, and I think we all have that part of ourselves that, it's like, I used to describe it as like this golden cell. And in those times when I felt like every cell in my body was poisoned and black and dead, I still knew that there, deep inside of me, was one golden cell that could never, ever, ever be poisoned. And we all have a golden cell, and it's just a matter of remembering that we innately hold that power. And even in the darkest moments when you think you're gonna die and everything is so painful, we as women inherently know and can use the cycle of life and death. We can let ourselves die knowing that we will continue to be reborn, because we are women and we cycle monthly or however long your cycle is, and we can follow and rely on the wisdom of nature that we can literally go through the fire and be reborn. And our essence can never be destroyed, and you hold that, you always hold that, and that is remembering truth, and that is the name that I coined for the work I want to do in the world, Satya Smara, which means remember truth. And that is one of the truths that I remind myself of when I need to, which is often.
Oh, let's let that sink in just for a moment. Wow. Wow, your words are just pure medicine. I just feel that like literally my whole cells are just like being nourished by that frequency, that transmission. I'm like, yeah, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your words, and for being here right next to me. What an honor.
We're in person. We're co-regulating.
Exactly. Wow. This is so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Oh my God,
Thank you
this
for
was
having
this
me.
was powerful. Thank you so
Mhm.
much. And yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put also in the description all your information where everyone can find you. You want to get in touch with Jacqueline. Thank you. Ah, wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was an honor to be here, and I really loved being able to share. And thank you for providing this platform and holding the space for me to express myself as I just did. What a gift it is to receive.
And it's so beautiful. We're gonna have a beautiful women's circle in 1 hour here.
For even more magic.
Exactly. So beautiful. So thank you again. Thank you so much. And thank you also for everyone for listening and for receiving that medicine. And yeah, see you all in another episode. Bye-bye.
Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother, I hear your heartbeat. Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother, I hear your heart. Mm-hmm.